This is Jack Spillane, and welcome to the chat. My guest today is Mark Fuller, who, as of January, was starting his second year as the full chancellor at UMass Dartmouth. Dr. Fuller came to UMass Dartmouth from UMass Amherst, where he spent 3 years as vice chancellor for advancement. And before that, he spent 9 years as the dean of the school's Eisenberg School of Management. Fuller is credited with cultivating some of the largest alumni gifts in UMass Amherst history as vice chancellor. And under his leadership at Eisenberg, the school rose 25 plus spaces in the U.S. News and World Report's rankings of business schools. Welcome, Chancellor Fuller.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So I'd like to start off talking about your agenda ahead. I've read through your curriculum vitae and your background. By the university's own admission, it is recovering from a decade-long decline in enrollment, both in attracting first-year students and student retention. How much of that is caused by the escalating cost of public university education these days?
Well, there certainly could be a bit of that that's caused by those costs, but I think it's also a demographic trend nationally with smaller graduating classes from high school. So there are a variety of, there's probably no one single answer, to be perfectly honest, right? There are many answers to that. So you have changes in demographics with graduating high school students. You have increased costs of higher education. Now, the good news about that for an institution like ours, public research university, is comparatively, our costs are going to come in at about 25 to 20% of the private, right? You could be spending 70 grand a year. In fact, I just spoke with somebody the other day who was trying to get their kid into Notre Dame, which was well over 80,000, a year, as opposed to our tuition levels for in-state students, which is really more like 15,000 a year. So we're still a very good, educational bargain. The amount of debt that our students graduate with is probably around 25,000, which with our exit salaries, which we can talk about later, is recoverable because of our, the types of employment they're getting, et cetera. So I think a lot of it is there's national trends demographically. There is the cost of higher education, which we're always very cognizant of, so we don't ignore that at all. And then I think for UMass Dartmouth in particular, we needed to change and modernize some of the ways that we recruit and retain students.
How does UMass Dartmouth compare to the other campuses in the UMass system? UMass Lowell, which is very similar demographically and city-wise, UMass Boston and Amherst in terms of declining enrollment this last decade. I know everybody has been down, but where do we fit in?
Well, I tend to be a very transparent person, so I which will probably be appreciated in the interview. I think we were probably in the worst situation among the four campuses in terms of declining enrollment, to be perfectly honest. Amherst, as a flagship, will always get their proportion of students, right? Their admission criteria quality can vary depending upon the number of students applying, but they're the least affected by some of these demographic shifts. And then as you go to Boston, Dartmouth, Lowell, you'll see a bigger effect. And again, then it comes down to, I believe, on how well you execute in terms of, attracting those students, how well you tell your story, what you do to retain the students that you have. And I think that was one of the reasons, perhaps, that, I was a viable candidate for this position. I'd done similar work at Eisenberg in terms of branding the school, raising its stature, increasing, graduation rates, pulling in more and more students. And so I think that was at least an attractive aspect of my candidacy for this job.
Mm-hmm. Were there particular reasons that you identified that and as a member of the media, I always appreciate transparency. So thank you. I like to think I knew the answer to the question before I asked it, but so are there specific reasons that UMass Dartmouth challenges that it has that the other campuses don't?
Well, I think one of the reasons, honestly, there's several. Again, many sort of subparts to this, to the answer to this question. There has been, as you well know, a bit of a leadership shifting over the last decade or so at this campus. Obviously, Gene McCormick was chancellor for this campus for a long time, but after Gene, leadership tended to be not as long a tenure in the institution, and that has all sorts of organizational implications, right? The folks that what's the strategy? Who's reporting into the leadership? Are they all on the same page? So we've probably had four or so different over the last decade, different sort of approaches to how we're getting students, where we get them from, and the rest of that. So that's a piece of it. The leadership transitions, not just at my level, but it also percolates down, right? The people that report into me, the provost's office, the vice chancellor of student affairs, the people running marketing, all those things can be rather unstable and undirected. I always liken it to having an interim coach at a basketball team, right? Nobody quite knows, what sort of recruiting strategy is going to be followed. You don't have time to put your team together to really execute the offense that you want to execute. And so all those sports analogies really hold true for higher education. And so the leadership transitions was part one, and sort of those implications downstream. And I think the second thing is, I've always said, the job is 10% strategy and 90% execution. And when I was business school dean, I used to say, look, there is no secret major that's going to drive interest in a business school. They all have more or less the same majors. Where you win is on execution. How well you train the students, how well you recruit the students, how well you socialize the students, how well you embed them in the culture of the place. And so in much the same way, that's the approach here. We're really looking at how we're, going back to the sports analogy, how we're blocking and tackling. We're obviously looking at program innovation, trying to stay modern to attract the students, but also looking at sort of the fundamentals on how we socialize our students, create a sense of belonging, how we recruit more effectively, how we use technology to communicate. All of those things we're paying a great deal of attention to over the last 2 years.
Well, given what you accomplished at Eisenberg and as vice chancellor, I guess we're hoping that you'll stay a while and accomplish some things here.
I intend to stay a while.
I started right off with the enrollment, and it occurs to me that I probably should have given you a chance to talk a little bit about your own agenda. And I build this interview as what's the next chapter at UMass Dartmouth. So if you want to take a little bit of time and talk about what your agenda is, go ahead. What is the next chapter at UMass Dartmouth?
So what's interesting to me, first of all, this place speaks to me, right? I'm a public educated person, public research university. I went to the University of Arizona, research public university. I went to public grade schools, public high schools. I taught at Washington State. I was at UMass Amherst, all of those public research universities. And so for me, my four brothers and I were the first in our family's history to go to college. So I'm a first gen college student, like literally 50% of our students. 50% of our students are first gen. And so this place speaks to me on that level. It also speaks to me because it is a research university. And I'm going to talk about why that's important and why that answers a bit of your question in terms of the future of UMass Dartmouth. I think that public research universities have a special place in sort of the fabric of higher education. So we have, as you probably know, we have experts on pandemic spread. We have experts on, creating materials that prevent concussions and crash helmets. We have experts on coastal sustainability. And those same experts teach in our classes, not just graduate classes, not just PhD students, but also teach in our undergraduate classes, sort of bringing the cutting edge knowledge to the undergraduate students. And so one of the questions that people ask me was, what differentiates UMass Dartmouth from other universities, right? So we're clearly a public research university, but we're one of the smallest public research universities in the nation. So Amherst is, 30,000 students. Lowell and Boston are more in the tune of maybe 15,000 students. We're about 7,000 students. And that campus intimacy is a differentiator for us. So that's one differentiator. It allows us to create a sort of a climate on campus that's not possible at a Michigan, which, has well over, probably 70,000 students at this time. So that's one thing. Another thing that really differentiates us is, even though we're at that size, that's 7,000 students, about 5,500 undergrads, 1,500 grads, we've got all of the major, what I call professional disciplines. So in addition to the liberal arts, right, that's sort of the fundamentals of higher education, we've also got a business school. We've got medical laboratory sciences. We've got nursing. We've got law. We've got engineering. We've got computer science. And so we have a really rich portfolio of professional schools, which in many cases drive really great jobs for our students. And so that's sort of differentiator number two. Small sort of suburban or rural school campus environment for a research university, all the professional schools, largely represented. And then I think the third thing for us really speaks to, our location. I actually love the South Coast. I think that if you think about even our other system competitors, Amherst is in the western part of the state, but both Boston and Lowell are more in the city, right? It's much denser there. And if you're looking for an experience at a research public that is, more, I guess, rural or certainly suburban, this is a great place for that. And I think all of those things are things that sort of differentiate us. You also asked about our positioning and sort of the strategy. I don't want to occupy too much time here. I'll let you ask more questions. But, as a business dean, the lucky thing that I have is I don't believe necessarily in a 160-page strategic plan that sits in somebody's desk drawer. I believe in focusing on the key things that you need to focus on. Obviously, you have a strategic direction, and that's to improve the financial and strategic health of the university, improve our reputation, and those sorts of things. But what we really want to do for us, because of this 10-year slide that you referenced in terms of overall enrollment, I tell my faculty and staff and students that we're really focusing on what I call the 4 R's: recruitment, retention, which is another way to say student success, our overarching reputation, and to continue our research momentum as a research university, because that is a differentiator for us.
So the last year or so, you've had some increases in enrollment. Are they primarily at the graduate or undergraduate level?
Great question. So we have both is the answer. The undergraduate, what we call first time, first year, which a lot of people refer to as freshmen, but that's a less accurate term in some ways. So first time, first year students, we are, for the first time, we're at a 3-year high, if you will. Over the last 3 years of this declining new student recruitment process, we've gone back and made progress over to bring us up to what the level was 3 years ago, almost to the level of what we were 5 years. Next year, and I believe next fall, 23, we'll be at a 5-year high. And so that's a great reversal. We spoke with the leadership team and all the faculty. We sort of speak as, it's like a plane that was sort of going down, skimming the water, and we needed to pull it up a little bit. And so we're seeing that slope change on new student recruitment.
Are you able to give a proportion of how much of it is graduate and how much of it is undergraduate?
I'm happy to. So the total numbers, I would say it's maybe half and half to pull back. But I'm saying for the undergraduate, first of all, that 3-year slide ties. That's not overall enrollment. I haven't even come to sort of the graduate piece yet. And so at the graduate level, we're probably getting 4 times the amount of applications right now. And our incoming graduate class, even for the spring semester, is double what it was this last spring. And so we've leaned heavily into new recruiting processes for both undergraduate students and graduate students. And so we're seeing traction on both ends.
Mm-hmm. So at a research university, but also a public regional university, what is a goal or an appropriate balance between local students and students from across the state, across the country, and even internationally?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one our local legislators often ask me. And my answer is simple. We have room for every qualified applicant that comes from the South Coast that wants to come here. We will serve those students. Now, what we didn't have here, which was actually a bit of a problem for us, is we didn't have good regional recruiting. We had a very small out-of-state regional population. That's not important just financially. There is a little bit of a tuition differential, obviously, but it's also important for the quality of the education that our students get. If you get a kid from New Bedford or Fall River or Dartmouth, you don't want them just to see other kids from Fall River, Dartmouth, and New Bedford. You need them to see kids from New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut and Rhode Island. So it increases, and international students. You have to create that energy and that growth opportunity for the students that come into a university like this. You've really got to have a more diverse student population geographically. And so we have increased, you asked about the increases in undergraduate and graduate. I'm a data person. So if we start to cut into those levels and we look at new student recruitment at the undergraduate level, we're about a threefold increase in out-of-state students, because we're also leaning into those students while at the same time building the relationships with the K-12s. I have a very close relationship with several of the community colleges. We're doing early college programs, all those things that are important for the South Coast, but we're also recruiting out of state, especially in the Northeast.
To be a freshman student at UMass Dartmouth these days, what sort of a grade point average and SAT cumulative score do you have to have?
So our average GPA coming in is actually a small bit higher than it has been. It's like a 3.5. That's the average. And then we, of course, look at the sort of the student portfolio. We're now test optional, which means the SAT, we're not taking that anymore. COVID put a real wrinkle in that. And to be perfectly honest, the national trends, and we're not alone in that. The same thing is true with Amherst, Boston, Lowell, Harvard, take your pick. So a lot of schools have gone test optional because there's always a big debate on the efficacy of that test in predicting success of students downstream. So our GPA, our average GPA has gone up. And then of course, it's a bell curve and maybe a little bit of a skewed bell curve. And so, we'll sort of automatic admissions, if you will, for anybody probably above a 3.2, unless it's a specific discipline like nursing, which may have a slightly higher threshold, or engineering. At the same time, we try to provide opportunities for students who may have struggled in high school, and we have specific programs that help bootstrap their ability. College Now is one of those programs that takes students that may not have done as well in high school, but really we think have the potential to do well in college, and provides a little extra support to those students over the first year.
I think most reasonable people would understand the benefits of having a strong regional, national, and international population, but I think they do worry about the traditional role of UMass Dartmouth in taking local students. What you say you have room for all students who qualify. How can we? Is there anything a university itself should be doing and making sure that a good percentage of local kids do qualify?
Right. And so I will say about 70% of our student population is coming from the South Coast. So it's a large proportion. And again, as I alluded a little bit earlier, when I came in 2 years ago, one of the first things I did was join an organization where all of the other presidents of all the South Coast universities and community colleges were a part. It was called Connect. And so whether it's Bridgewater State, Bristol Community College, Massasoit, all of these, I'm on first name basis with all of the presidents there. And so with Laura Douglas over at BCC, for example, we have a very close partnership, and we're trying to provide, those pathways for those students that may want to go the community college route or may find that more economical. We try to build those pathways. In addition, we have K-12 relationships and early college relationships with Durfee and New Bedford High and Taunton, and et cetera, so that there are ways for those students at those high schools to get exposure to the college experience so that we can, make that pathway in easier. When I started, I said we're 50% Pell, or first generation, we're 40% Pell eligible, which is, sort of a low income metric. For many of our students, we're 37% students of color coming in. And so all those first gen kids, they don't understand what my kids did, right? They don't understand what the college experience looks like. And so we have to find ways, to your question, to help prepare those students for what college looks like, because they will be more successful when they know that. People will go to what they're familiar to. And so we're trying to provide that familiarity through our early college programs, our relationships with the K-12s, and even our relationships with the community colleges. And so we're working hard to build those pathways. And those are all largely new initiatives that we've started over the last 2 years.
Great. I want to stay with these town gown questions just a little bit longer,
Yep.
if you will.
No, happy to.
So I have heard that New Bedford, of course, is home to two of the campus's satellites.
Right.
One, the School of Marine Science and Technology, is a much beloved school, has played a critical role in some of the research that brought back the scallop industry, as I'm sure you're familiar, and ground fishing also. But my understanding is that they have had some attrition in their faculty over the last decade, and some aging of the faculty, and so how much of that is related to the economic struggles of that the university and other universities have sustained since 2008, say, and how much of it is due to different thinking as to what the university wants to be as it evolves?
Well, so I will say, for me, and I can't answer for, some of my the prior leadership here, but for me, I think SMAS, I talk about SMAS, the School of Marine Science and Technology, all the time. And it's not just the scallop industry, it's renewable energy, obviously New Bedford, wind energy. We have researchers at SMAS that are playing a vital role in sort of that intersectional space, to try to make the new energy generation and how they put the turbines up and where they put them and how it influences sort of the coastal resiliency. So they are, knee deep in that research, looking at all of those things so that we have a robust and viable sort of coastal fishing industry, because New Bedford's the largest port, in the country, and it's also one of the windiest locations in North America. So we've got to find ways to marry those two things very closely. And so we're committed to that. There's been a little attrition. There's been a little attrition at a university level because of the declining enrollments, to be honest. But there is no strategic attrition, at least from my perspective, in the new provost towards SMAS. In fact, we're looking at how we could start to really increase resources for that and other high demand areas that we have. Computer science is an area that's attracting a lot of interest. The blue economy attracts a lot of interest. Other areas, some of our business disciplines, data science. So in all of those cases, as we move forward, we try to calibrate, our faculty to be able to really deliver the educational and research products for those areas. So we're fully committed. As I said, on differentiators, the fact that we're on the South Coast and the fact that SMAS plays a vital role in sort of that coastal sustainability is critically important to UMass Dartmouth.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're down from 19 to 10 versus a year ago? It sounds like that's significant.
That we haven't lost
Okay.
9 faculty over there. We did have obviously one faculty member who just passed away, and we wanted to bring on a new provost before we squared away uh, sort of the dean situation. There's been an interim dean, and so we're working through that. But no, we're not down, that many faculty.
Okay. Um, so how much is a school like SMAS and is expected to pay its own way from the research it does, uh, you know, the grants and the things that it brings
Yeah.
in? Is that something that a school like that is expect? I mean, you hear more and more about, we have to be the kind of school that is supplying the interest that the students want to study. And so I'm just curious as to it sounds like you're committed to SMAS, but is it the kind of school that is doing everything it needs to do in terms of bringing in research grants and things
Yeah,
like
I
that?
think this is I actually have this conversation as well with faculty. It's sort of the business end of what we do, right? Because like it or not, only 40% of our support comes from the state. It's even less at a place like Amherst, which has bigger enrollments and therefore more comes from those sources, but only 40% comes from the state contribution. And the rest of it is tuition and fees, auxiliaries, philanthropy, research grant, overhead, et cetera. So any large scale university like ours, which has multiple colleges in it, a very different model than you might have at, Amherst College, which is sort of a combination of sort of departments. But for us, we have large colleges, engineering, business, nursing. And so they all are either a cost center or a revenue center. And we're not closing any of them, right? So what you try to do is you try to balance the portfolio. So places like, for example, our College of Arts and Sciences or the College of Business, those are typically, and I'm an ex-business dean and I live this, those are revenue centers for the campus. In many cases, they bring in more resources and they help you support areas that may not be revenue centers, that are more expensive to run. I mean, colleges of engineering, for example, are very expensive to run because, the equipment that's needed to do the research and even the equipment that's needed to do the teaching, they're just inherently more expensive units. But you're not going to ever close down your College of Engineering because you'd be out of the education business. You would limit what you can do. So what you have to do is balance this portfolio of revenue and cost centers. So the direct answer to your question then is we have in our portfolio both of those things. Now, SMAS, much of their discretionary money sort of comes from their research activity, and they account for a good chunk of the university's research, no doubt. But with research money, that's really not money that is unrestricted to pay other bills. It goes towards the research you're conducting. So even though it might go on the revenue side of the equation, it has a tie on the other side of the equation because that money goes to run the research operations. And so because that student population is maybe a bit less, it's probably in most cases going to operate as more of a cost center for the campus, but that's okay. I have many cost centers and you just have to find a way to balance the bills at the end of the day, because we don't want to stop doing research on coastal sustainability, and we're not going to stop doing that.
Yeah. Reminds me a little bit of the stories in newspapers that sell newspapers and the stories that are public service that you have to
Right.
do. So we had similar about a year ago. I wrote a column on the College of Visual and Performing Arts in downtown New Bedford,
Right.
and similar issues again were brought to my attention relative to some of the fine arts faculty,
Right.
the numbers being lower, and the school moving a little more to the area of computer design, gaming,
Right.
interior decorating, and interior fashion things that are popular with students, and to be perfectly honest, pursuits that probably are more likely to result in jobs for many of the students who come to public universities. But uh, the uh, the CVPA has also played a critical role in downtown New Bedford's rebirth, and those concerns have died down a bit. But I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about that
Happy to.
campus and what the current thinking is about the future.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and I've said this publicly, we love being in New Bedford, whether it's SMAST or the Star Store. We love being there, and I really honestly can't imagine UMass Dartmouth without that presence. So we continue to try to have that presence in both of those facilities. And for the Star Store itself has really been transformational for the university, right? Because we do have the only College of Visual and Performing Arts in the system. We're the only one that has that. And so studio arts is obviously, a big piece of the Star Store's history, and it's been a vital piece of the history. But you're correct, student demand is also something we have to pay attention to, right? And so the design arts, if you will, where there's probably a more, whether it's architecture or more a pragmatic aspect, game design, those sorts of things are attracting more and more students. So we've seen this shift in interest. And what we've tried to do, and again, going maybe back to the conversation that we just had in terms of balancing a portfolio, with revenue centers, cost centers, we try to maintain suitable, and I don't, have to define what suitable is, a suitable presence in maybe some of those studio arts, and be creative about how we can continue to educate students in those studio arts, while at the same time meeting the needs for students that are interested in some of the arts that have more direct tie-in into industry, right? Game design being an example, or interior design, or those sorts of things. And so we balance it. And I think and I think even your article may have touched on it, but one of the things we did is we sort of combined several of the studio arts into a larger sort of integrated, major sort of integrated studio arts, we called it. And so that allowed folks to take, I don't know if it, textiles or, ceramics or other things, while at the same time pursuing what we sort of think of as a meta major. And by the way, the Star Store and CVPA are not the only places where we think of this idea of meta major, which is sort of a combinational major. We've talked about that even in the game design space, which might have, engineering students and computer science students and art students taking classes from all of those sub areas. And so it's just not limited to the CVPA. It's, it can be across the campus looking at these sort of hybrid majors. So we have to adapt that way based on student demand, because we have to have the classes that the students are demanding. It's not like we can push students into a particular major. They'll go somewhere else. And so, but at the same time, we're well aware of our strong history in the studio arts, and we'll continue to do whatever we can to sort of maintain that presence as long as there's student interest.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that the university is committed to the Star Store remaining in downtown New Bedford, but a few years back we were hearing different things. You mentioned the strength of having this suburban/rural campus, and it's a public university. Things come down to dollars and cents. Can you talk a little bit more about your feeling about the commitment to the city in terms of the Star Store and SMAS?
Well, so you're probably, I know you are well aware of the history, but maybe for the audience, I'll repeat it. The Star Store was part of a lease that was started, I think, in 2001. So we've got an annual appropriation from the legislature that allowed us to maintain the Star Store. Some small amount of maintenance, and then operations, and then lease payments. And so we've been in the Star Store for, maybe 22 years. Now that lease is on, sort of an extension, the back end of that lease. And so now we're left and it's not really even so much there's four players in sort of the future of the Star Store. One is the university and our intent and desire to be there. So that's stated, already said, we want to be in the Star Store. We want to be in New Bedford. Then the other players are sort of figuring out how to make that happen. And so we're really waiting, and because we don't have an extra $2.7 million in our budget to be able to continue to pay that. We don't have an extra $30 million that we estimate might be necessarily to renovate that building. Even if we got it for very little money, it's still going to require renovation money. We in the business, we call it deferred maintenance, and that is 100-year-old building. And so there's a lot of deferred maintenance if we look at that as a long-term asset for the university, and we would like it to be.
Yeah, I believe Senator Montigny has said that he has a plan for that, but he's one legislator. He has influence up there, but still one.
Well, we're working with it. I mean, we have a good relationship with Senator Montigny. He wants it to happen. We want it to happen. And as you say, I think it's just figuring out how it happens is the key.
Is it my am I not understanding it correctly when this issue of deferred maintenance, which is really maintenance that should have been done all along to a building like that, is that a lack of poor planning on the state's behalf, or the legislature, or the university?
Well, there was a level of operational maintenance that we did maintain in the Star Store, given the resources that we had. But we have the same thing on campus, and so what happens is it's not as linear. If in terms of that maintenance, in many cases, it can get a little lumpy. So, for example, you're probably aware we just got a $73 million infrastructure investment in our College of Arts and Sciences, the Arts and Sciences building on campus. That building was built in 1969. It never had air conditioning. Things, the elevator parts had started to break down. They have a life expectancy, and over with the declining enrollments, perhaps over the last 10 years, none of those things really were getting fixed at the rate that they needed to, because again, we have a budget to operate from. And so what we did is and with great help from the governor's office and our legislators, got an infrastructure investment to allow us to go back in, and sort of revitalize our arts and sciences building. And so that's a lumpy process. You're not going to spend, the $73 million, or if it's 30 million or whatever, if you don't need to on that. You have other issues that you try to address. And so deferred maintenance sort of accumulates. It's not unique to us. I lived through it at UMass Amherst. It was very much the same thing. You try to stay on top of things the best you can, but you're never going to be able to stay completely on top of them. So that's where we sort of found ourselves with Large, and it's a little bit of where we find ourselves with the Star Store. It's a 100-year-old building, or over 100 years. It's at this point that things like maybe the roofs start to have issues, and other areas, and there's just these. So maybe if you think of it as a home, when you go to remodel your kitchen, that's a one-time expense that's done every 15 or 20 years. You don't replace a cabinet door one at a time every year. It can't be spread out like that. And so that's a bit where we find ourselves in this unique campus, which is, I always joke that it's sort of like a game of musical chairs, and I was the chancellor that was in the game when all the deferred maintenance came due. So I think we have a lot of it to address, because of all our campus was built like at one time almost, except for the business school. Right? The whole thing was built in the late 60s, early 70s. And guess where deferred maintenance starts to hit? About 40 to 50 years out. And so that's where we find ourselves.
Let's move on to another aspect of the money issue, which is just so integral to everything, as I'm sure as a business prof. You had some success at UMass Amherst in increasing alumni giving, but you had some big bequests that came through, and that's going to be a focus of your work there at UMass Dartmouth, but this is a different part of the state, different region.
Right.
Well, how are you going to come after that? What's your plan to increase alumni giving?
So there's a couple things that I think we can touch on there that'll be useful. So we have a reasonably small development group on the campus right now, by far the smallest of the system. So we were, 10 times, maybe bigger at UMass Amherst, and Michigan was probably 10 times bigger than UMass Amherst. And so those things have to be built up over time. You can't go from 0 to 60 miles an hour just, in 1 second. But where I think we can make traction, first of all, I think that people give. This has always been my experience and I had an alum that used this phrase that I love: people give when you're investment grade, right? It's like if you invest in money, in the stock market, or you invest in things that have momentum. You go to football games when they're winning, when the teams are winning. And so your ability to garner external resources, especially from alumni, is very much related to the story of momentum that you can tell about the institution. And so we had to really reverse, if you will, our fortunes and start to tell the story of the momentum. And we have great, our research expenditures are now going up 20%. We're at a 3-year high on freshman enrollment. Graduate student enrollment's up. We've got a $73 million infrastructure over here. We have the fastest growing law school, public law school in the country. So we have now momentum stories that we can tell. And so then you've got to build up the messaging that attracts the alumni back into that. And our alumni, many of them are not used to giving, right? They're Amherst College. You're going to give to Amherst College or Mount Holyoke or Princeton the moment you step in the door before you're even admitted, because you've met with alumni and they say how they give, and there's this cultural expectation that feeds that. And a lot of the public universities were later to that game, but many of them are further along. Michigan is a great example. They get a huge amount of money, but again, that infrastructure has been built. So we still have to build that infrastructure. So that's one thing. And again, we now have momentum stories to tell. So that will help us do that. The other thing, though, that's really going to help us jumpstart this, I believe, because you mentioned the different population that many of our folks come from, could be first generation wealth if they did well coming out of school. We need to play a bigger role in an area, and spending 3 years as vice chancellor for advancement at Amherst. I learned a few things in that job, and we need to build up our infrastructure in gift planning, which is sort of estate gifts, et cetera, because people may be able to give smaller amounts of money now, but they may be in a situation where they can leave more in their estate for us later on, and you prime that pump, and that will start to make an incredible difference to the institution. For example, a small liberal arts private, I've mentioned a few of them, may be pulling in $30 million a year just in estate giving without doing anything. They're just realizing that income because they did the work 10 or 15 years ago, and they're starting to reap the rewards. And so we have to build that infrastructure as well. And that's very important, on the long term. And again, you have to have a good story to tell. And so I think we're getting there. My job one for me was to build a better story to tell for the institution, to start to do better recruitment and retention. That improves the financial health of the institution. And then with the research success and the Charlton School, for example, of business, went up 52 spots in US News rankings over the last 2 years. So tremendous success story there, right? And so then you get people to start to invest and bet on, those pieces of the organization.
So I for what it's worth, I have my own theory about alumni giving, and one aspect of it, I think, is a region or a community's bonding with the school in question. And I think one of the ways that regions bond with schools is through their athletic teams. And I know that UMass Lowell has 15 Division I athletic teams, and I don't think you guys have any Division One athletic teams. Maybe you do. That one that I think you're mostly Division Three. From time to time, I hear talk about moving up to Division Two. Uh, is that? It just always struck me that the university is not concentrated on that in an area that is. I mean, New Bedford has always and Fall River have been both football crazy cities historically, not so much now, but certainly the suburbs are now. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about athletic teams is that is that
I love this question. So first of all, I think that D3, honestly, and having been at D1s my entire life, I think D3 athletics is where the action is. I wouldn't go to D1 because D1 and a lot of other people are losing money.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can go through the institutions that are losing money and wish they hadn't gone to D1 and wish they could go back to D3.
How about D2?
Or D2, but even D2 costs more money than D3. So I will say we have added, I think last year, again, this goes back to sort of leadership philosophies. For me, I love the student athlete, right? Because especially a D3 student athlete who is playing for the love of the game. They don't have aspirations to try to get in the NBA or professional baseball or whatever. They're playing for the love of the game. I have students that are coming back to campus for a fifth year because they want to play softball or they want to play lacrosse or they want to play football. And they got an extra year because of COVID or some other reason, because they love to play. They're like getting a master's, while they're doing it, or they stretch. So I think the student athlete in D3 sports is vital. So what I did when I came in, because they had shut down several sports before I got here, we added them back in. I expanded, the football team. We added women's swimming back in. We added women's tennis back in. We expanded women's soccer. We expanded, so we went, and we probably have 60 to 70 more student athletes than we had year before. And we're going to continue to look for opportunities to expand those. Now, we have to be careful to be sure that we have good gender balance across those sports. And so we have to grow them strategically. But I think athletics, and we won the New England Bowl last year, D3. We went to the Sweet 16 with men's basketball. We almost got in to the tournament with women's basketball. So we have really good athletics, which is a great recruiting thing for us, because there's a ton of students all through the Northeast that want to play sports. They're good students, but they don't have aspirations to play in the pros, right? So I think D3 is a great place to be. And I would be really, really hesitant to try to go to D2, which then requires additional scholarship support. And D1 is filled with a bunch of scholarship support because it's much more expensive to operate in those spaces as opposed to D3, which are attracting students that want to get an education and want to play sports.
Is it an ingredient in developing alumni loyalty? What division?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. One of the big points of pride that I have, for example, football. Let's talk about football. When I got here, it's like, that we even the years before I got here, we were attracting nobody to those games. We filled the bleachers probably on 4 home games last year because the students were starting to come out. We did a good job sort of energizing our student population about those. We had great success winning those. So I think when I talked about recruitment and retention, a big part of retention is sort of that sense of belonging and vitality on campus. And so athletics can play a real important role, not the only role, because there's other sorts of student activities other than athletics. By the way, it's not just collegiate athletics, it's also club sports. We have a cricket team that goes crazy. We have a rugby team that's a club sport team, men's and women's rugby. And, I love those students. I mean, I've taken pictures with them. They produce some of the greatest Instagram content that I've ever seen. And so I think athletics, whether it's club sports, D3 sports, and all these other activities, are a vital part of the campus, and they energize alumni, to your point, right? Because we now have Blue and Gold Weekend. We get a lot of folks back. We have several athletic contests there. The alumni go to those things. They see our teams, they're winning. It's very exciting. It's what a university should be.
Okay. So programmatically, where do you see, are there programs that you see as ripe opportunities for university growth? We know that Charlton has moved up in the rankings.
Yep.
Where do you see what the law school has had some great success with the social justice mission.
Right.
Where do you see the university expanding?
I think well, in a lot of areas, but immediate demand for us right now is in the area of computer science, data science, business analytics. So, some of those, the informatics and analytics areas, right? And so there's tremendous demand for those areas. And that's where we're seeing a lot of traction in our graduate program growth, right? So these 2-year or 1.5-year graduate programs in, data analytics. So that we're seeing that sort of growth there. But we're also, our provost is and one of the reasons, I hired him, he's an engineer by trade. He was a dean at North Texas. He's been a department chair at Northeastern, and he had a significant role in growing their grad programs and sort of looking analytically at where those high demand areas are. And so now what we're doing beyond computer science, data analytics, business analytics, et cetera, we've put out sort of an inquiry, if you will, to the campus as a whole, where they can do proposals which have to be sort of justified on what areas could be high growth for them. And so it could be, we talked about these meta majors before. Maybe you have healthcare analytics, right? That's some sort of combined degree with healthcare and, and sort of the data science folks. And so we're looking for those sort of creative degrees, and it doesn't have to be just in the informatics. It could be other areas, criminal justice, other things which could have high growth potential. So we're looking at those areas as well. And much of that comes from the faculty, and then we do the appropriate research to see what the industry demand is and the potential student demand for those areas.
Hey, can you give an example of one that has grown recently?
I mean, certainly one that's grown recently is computer science. It's gone, crazy, and will continue to grow. We just live in such an era of, high technology right now that it's increased, and we have, our challenge there is to continue to invest, to be sure we have enough qualified faculty at the type of institution we are that can really deliver that curriculum and do the other things that are necessary.
Is that a hybrid program between engineering and business, or?
The computer science is not. The computer science is it's a standalone department, if you will, in the College of Engineering. And so it just has tremendous demand. However, the data science program is sort of a hybridized program between engineering and our College of Arts and Sciences, in particular, the math group over there. So we have them both in those cases.
You spoke a while back about an increasing number of students coming in the 3rd and 4th year after they've gone to the junior colleges, whether because it's more affordable, whether because they're not ready. Do you see that trend as continuing? And is that something that particularly relates to local students?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's both a preparation and an income driver for that, right? And so if you have a high need on the income side, you may just decide, and the family may decide, that the best pathway, and I always thought this is a great pathway, is to do a couple years at a community college at a fraction of the cost, and then come in and pick up the last 2 years, at a 4-year institution. I would hope an institution like ours. But there are other students, as you know. I mean, my daughter just started college 2 years ago, and she went straight in, right? So she didn't do the community college route. She just went straight in. And so I think the need-based factors for the students can be a factor. And I think there's also sometimes a preparation factor. And I mentioned that 50% of our students are, first generation, right? So they don't have a lot of collegiate experience in their household. And for them, a community college may be a great first step to getting the, the 4-year degree. And so I always feel very, very cooperative with our community colleges and not competitive, because we're going to get, plenty of students one way or the other. I'm confident of that because we're doing a good job of recruiting. I really do care about higher education and public higher ed because it changed my life. And I want all those students to really have, a great opportunity, because we're just, the earning potential of a college graduate is, I believe, like 80% more than a non-college graduate. And so that's just better for us.
Absolutely. Have you had to incorporate what we would used to call remedial courses to students who have been admitted, but who maybe are not up to speed in their writing skills, perhaps their math skills? Is UMass doing much of that these days?
So this is, again, great question. So we've launched a bunch of these programs since I got here. One of the issues that we had, as I said, was not only new student recruitment, but also the retention of our students. And sometimes those retention issues can be caused by 3 primary factors: financial, social, which is maybe isolation, loneliness, mental health, some of those things, and then academic. So so again, I'm a data person, so we've looked at the data. It turns out that most of the reports that we get for students that depart are not financial. They tend to be more on the academic and the social side. And so as we try to address getting better and better retention, exactly what you described are some of the things that we're doing. So we will do bridge programs, sometimes in the summer, sometimes over the winter break, that will try to catch people up if they have math deficiencies, right? Or they weren't adequately prepared, for Math 150. We do sort of a pre-boot camp in those topics. Or if they struggled in chemistry, we try to provide things like supplemental instruction that sort of parallels the offering of a class. So you might be in a class, Jack, during the day, but then at night, you might attend a supplemental instruction class, which is taught by a past student who really did well in the class and can deliver that material and content in a slightly different way, answering those questions. And so we have all sorts of those programs that we're launching. We have pilots all over the place in terms of addressing areas that help students succeed. We had a very interesting speaker come to campus last week who talked about the iGen. And, a lot of people think that a lot of the struggles that students are having might be just a result of COVID. It's much deeper than that. And she was fascinating. Twangy was her name, and she spoke about sort of the internet generation over the last decade and how it has sort of slowed a maturation process. And what happens when I don't know what age you got your first car, started to drive, or I did, but it was much earlier than today's students do. And there's all these indicators: when you took your first drink, when you drove first, when you took the first date, all the rest of this. And so they're delayed today. And the data is stark. I mean, it's a chart that goes like this in terms of the proportion of the population that are delayed on those first things. And so what that does is creates vast pressure and sort of resiliency, a lack of resiliency, I think, for many of these students to solve some of their problems. And so what we're in the business of doing now is sort of creating those scaffolding systems that will help those students be successful, because they're still smart. They're going to have a great career, but the education of yesterday is not the education of today. And so we've got to provide those bridge programs, the supplemental instruction, and other sorts of scaffolding to solve those issues.
Well, we're approaching our cutoff. You've really let me roam over a wide range of issues, so I appreciate your openness to do this. Yeah, you said you were transparent, and as far as I can see, you have been. So, is there anything you'd like to wrap it up with about the next chapter for UMass Dartmouth?
Yeah, I truly do love it down here, first of all, on the South Coast. And I love the university. I love the challenge and the momentum that we have. I believe that we can really become something quite special down here. I mean, we already have unique attributes: a law school, SMAS, great colleges, et cetera. But as you said, I don't think that, there's been sort of these enrollment pressures, and a lot of that has been due to just getting the momentum going and the leadership at the institution. So I think we're really going to be making some significant moves. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that that could happen. And so I'm really excited. And I think we're starting to get a little bit of that contagion on campus as well, and sort of a change in feel. In fact, we had a legislative breakfast maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and one of the representatives said that I've never seen such energy on the campus as I've seen over the last year. And so I think that we're a great value from a cost perspective. We talked about that early in the interview, but that only matters if you deliver great product. And we're delivering great product, and the product is going to get better and better. We're graduating 97% of our students upon graduation within 6 months have a job or are in graduate school, 97%. That number is equal or better than many of the other UMass campuses. And people don't know that. Our average exit salary, which includes, maybe some of the lower paying professions in some of the fields, is 50 grand. If you go out in data science or computer science or, computer engineering, it's over 100 grand. I mean, whereas the average income for many of the households in New Bedford or Fall River may be 40 grand, right? So these are transformational numbers. If you want to talk about, a university that can transform a region, it's UMass Dartmouth. And I want to play that role. I want the campus to play that role, for the next decade. I think it can be really, really exciting.
My guest has been UMass Dartmouth Chancellor Mark Fuller for the full hour of the New Bedford Light chat. Thanks for talking to us, Chancellor. We'll be looking to see the next chapter, and we're all fans of UMass Dartmouth.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jack.